a lot of people have heard about this rumor that the Israeli government was responsible in some way or another, for creating Hamas. And there's truth to that. There is absolutely truth to that. There was a organization back in the day called the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and this was a secular, non-religious movement. They were a nationalist movement, and so they were gaining popularity. The Palestinian people favored them. And so what did the Israeli government do? They said, well, geez, we see all the support.
That's not going to work. You won't be able to fight with them.
Yeah, that's not good for business. They're not making it about religion. I mean, we can't weaponize people so easily against what they're asking for, which is... Exactly. And I'm not saying that they were angels in any way, shape, or form, because they weren't. But I mean, at the same time, this was a secular movement, which is to say non-religious. That's a big deal. So what do? Right. They go ahead and they start encouraging and on some levels working
Funding,
with... Exactly, working with Hamas, the group we recognize as Hamas today. And this is not me saying this, okay? This is officials.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for beaming in to part 2 of my special with the always impeccable Gavin Nascimento. In our first part, we covered up to about World War I. We had fantastic feedback. We're going to be delving into the modern day era of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And if you are not subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and do so now. We appreciate you and we love you. Thank you. Special thank you to Gavin for his incredible research and awesome body of work. Sit back and enjoy the show. Thank you so much. So, in the wake of the Balfour Declaration, as the initial kind of results of it were more of what you would call a typical, people trying to settle into a land, as we saw in the United States as it was colonized and people came from overseas, and then kind of the East Coast filled up, and then we saw them start to move out west and find property and find work and try to establish a home and grow some food and intermingle in a way with whoever was around them that was part of a community.
100%.
And the way I kind of understand it is, at least at that from 1917, the Jews that were moving into Palestine were a very, very much a minority, but they were not being they were kind of integrating slowly into society, and it was kind of a slow drip process.
And innocently. So I actually
pretty innocently.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you use that as an example. I might have to borrow that one. That's a very good example, because more often than not, what happens is what rulers do that may have sinister intentions is they will in fact take people with benevolent intentions, because the best deception is one that's actually legit, but you're the one that's controlling kind of the pieces on the board. And then you get them to slowly go into a region and actually acculturate that region. That was in fact a form of colonization in the past. Like literally, you can start to change the landscape of a culture through assimilation. The Roman Empire was in fact quite famous for doing that. That's how they overcame, I think it was the Gauls, because they couldn't do it through outright force. So they gradually did it through this acculturation process where you change the landscape ideologically and so on and so forth. But it's being done by otherwise good people. Now, what's very interesting as well about this particular time is, as this was slowly going on, I mean, there had to be a lot of diplomatic and political maneuvering, because this was very deceptive what they did, right? You promising the Arabs the land, then you're saying you're going to carve up the land amongst yourselves, and now you're promising the Zionists the land. And so in classic Machiavellian political style, the British authorities, they were still kind of, we've made this Balfour Declaration. It wasn't a guarantee still, but it was just like acknowledging, the same McMahon-Hussein correspondence. So in this particular region, what we have now is we have the Jewish population innocently settling in and alongside Palestinians. And overwhelmingly, these people, they were getting along, overwhelmingly. But now they were under the occupation of the British. And as you can imagine, with all of that deception, there was a lot of anger towards the British authorities. Okay. Yes. So there was something known as the Jaffa riots, which illustrate this. Jaffa riots. And the Jaffa riots were actually where the Palestinian population, so the Arab population and the Jewish population together were rebelling against the British authorities. It was called, I think it was Mandatory Palestine, something along those lines, some silly political term, but it was essentially British occupation. Now, in a previous podcast, what I pointed out, and this is so significant for people to understand, because when you can remove the emotional irrationality that puts these landmines in your head where you can't think clearly, like you become very impulsive and you get angry and defensive and you just want to fight, and it's such a strange, bizarre thing. It's not natural. That's indicative of some kind of trauma, guys. Like, have you ever been around somebody and they overreact to something? Maybe you've even done it, and then you have to sit there and you say, okay, that was way over the top.
That's why they had to behead babies. They're beheading babies. I'm like,
exactly. And so it inculcates a form of trauma in you, and this actually puts up a mental block in your mind, a proverbial landmine that you can't go in that direction, but you have to find a way, to, whatever it is, to sidestep that so you can earnestly question what's taking place here. And what I said in a previous podcast, because when you can look at things objectively, you can start to take a scientific interpretation of it. And just so people didn't get the wrong impression, I spoke out big time about scientism during the whole COVID thing, so I'm not the science tribe. All right, just to quickly point that out. But you can make scientific observations which are free from the emotional, irrational tribalism that misleads us. And one of those things, as articulated and detailed in a publication called Dying to Win from Professor Robert Pape, is that foreign occupation, which is when a foreign government, a foreign military is occupying a specific piece of land, this encourages acts of terrorism. This encourages, he actually studied specifically suicide bombings, because at that time, that was the big thing. They're like, they engaged in these terrorist suicide attacks because it's part of their religion. And I've read the Quran. That is simply not true. It's obscene. The average person is not going to blow themselves up, even if the Bible or the Quran says so. The average person is not going to go with the most insane translations and interpretations. It's just, think from a human perspective. And anyways, in this, he noted that the overwhelming majority, I think, was 95% over something like 2 to 3 decades that had been studied, all the known terrorist attacks. What he found was the smoking gun had nothing to do with religion. It was about foreign occupation. In fact, he found that the primary purveyors, the primary group, the most prolific group, which was the Talmud Tigers, they were a secular group, which means they were non-religious. And it's not difficult to understand how this works. So I've sifted through all kinds of testimony from U.S. soldiers and the war crimes they committed, and I've more recently done this with Israeli soldiers. When you are in a land and you have these military individuals, oftentimes very young, but quick to pull the trigger, and they get brainwashed that these people are your enemy, they want to harm you. So now they are operating on a level of fear, but they are capable of waging violence.
Right.
And then you in a place where they speak a different language, they have different customs, and yet you have immunity against their customs and their way of doing things. Right. It's a recipe for bad shit to happen.
It's a recipe for radicalism. Right?
Absolutely. Well, the thing is, it's going to happen that they're going to feel bullied, the local population. Yeah. Right. There's going to be checkpoints. There's going to be an innocent civilian accidentally gets killed, which always happens. And then what's going to happen? Of course, there's going to be what they call blowback. So this was going on, and I'm not even talking about this in relation to Palestine and Israel now. I'm talking about this with the British occupation. So the Palestinians and the Arab Palestinians and the Jews, they were in fact somewhat united against this threat. And then what you start to find is it degenerates where they start to go at each other. And although I haven't gotten up to this point yet, in terms of sensible speculation, I like to call it sensible speculation, and my relatively prolific history of detailing how the ruling class operate, their methodologies, and so on and so forth, and specifically the British Empire, renowned for divide and conquer. I'm almost certain that there was some element of them dividing and conquering these two populations that they were trying to occupy for their own specific goal and purpose.
Oh, I'm sure there was.
For sure.
There was.
Yeah.
And I've even heard before you go on that, you know, there were think tanks happening in Britain, you know, that were meeting solely about how to radicalize the young men of those populations in order to create strife and animosity between them, because they were starting to unite against, you know, the occupying British and the Brotherhood of Islam,
the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
These groups came about, they didn't just happen naturally, but they were formed and they were groomed and they were titled and made and they were given purpose by these.
Yeah, the more powerful guys. Yeah, I mean, that's how it has been historically.
Terrorist groups, you know, I mean, they have an origin as well.
For
at
sure,
least in modern history.
Yeah, for sure. It's just gaslighting the population, you know. Yeah. We've been so gaslighted in so many ways, and the truth has been so inverted that the true terrorist groups, of course, as you know, are the intelligence agencies, the alphabet agencies. And then they give birth to these smaller ones for strategic purposes. Like what happened in Libya, for example. Sure, they go ahead, they arm the Libyan Islamic fighting group, which was, they actually were birthed during Operation Cyclone and when they trained the Mujahideen. But at that time that they were funding and training them, which is unambiguous, we know about it now. But at the time they were doing it, they were internationally recognized by the US government, the UK government, and the United Nations as a terrorist organization. They overthrew Gaddafi, at the time, the highest standard of living in Africa. I'm not saying that he was this angel or whatever, but he was doing a lot of good things in Libya specifically. Overthrew him, became a failed state. They immediately erected the Al Qaeda flag, and then what happens? Then there's bombs in North Africa. And, it's a terrorist. But we need to go into Africa now to prevent the terrorists that we put there. And so it gives you this very convenient excuse to still look benevolent to everybody that we saving the day, but really we put them in there, right? I'm creating the problem as the solution.
Yep.
But specifically in like regards to this divide and conquer methodology of the British Empire, a perfect place to look is just the Scramble for Africa, right? That's exactly what was done there, and it was done in multiple places. I mean, the powers that be, the European elitists, carved up Africa, and not just Africa. I mean, this happened everywhere. But if you look at, for example, what took place with the Rwandan genocide, that has its roots in that divide and conquer methodology. In Uganda, the ongoing fighting there, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Uganda was under British administration. I'd have to look that up again. But they did the exact same thing. They're offering to
give it away. You know, it must be. It must have been.
There you go. You're right. Okay, good thinking there. So I'm pretty sure, as you rightfully point out, that Uganda was also under British occupation and colonization. They did the same thing there, guys, where they divided and conquered the population against the South, where they favored, I can't remember if they favored the North over the South, which is why to this day there's a major divide between the two populations. But essentially, this is just part of how they conduct themselves. And when we look at the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, the Sykes-Picot agreement, and all this deception and duplicity, where they've got no moral compass, is it really that difficult to believe that something may have happened along those lines with Palestine and Israel, or the Jews and the Arabs? I think it's highly logical. But now, as this starts to snowball, there is tensions. Okay, there is tensions, and we can get into that now. The tensions, and it starts to escalate into horrible things taking place. So one of the things is the 1929 Hebron Massacre. Right now, the reason why I pointed this out, because there's numerous events, but this was where the Arab population, and I mean, I need to dig so much more into this because I'm sure there's so much more to it, but the Arab population essentially murdered a lot of the Jewish population in brutal fashion. Okay.
Yeah.
But the reason why I specifically chose this one to highlight, not just to bring balance into the equation and help people understand and also acknowledge that, yes, these horrible things taking place on numerous sides. What we had is when this took place, most Arabs sheltered the Jewish population. And this, again, guys, is going back to our inborn humanity, right? So they always want to make it seem as though like there's something fundamentally different between an Arab baby and a Jewish baby. Like the dynamics are somehow so dramatically different. But what we essentially have, for example, in that massacre, first of all, we need to know always, you know, as a researcher, I'm sure it's the first thing, at least one of the first things that popped up into your mind is who's arming these individuals to commit these crimes? Because when there's foreign occupation, exactly, who instigated it? Like there's a lot of fine details that I'm sure will emerge over time, as is generally the case. But who instigated it? Because as is very true, if you look at different British administrations, colonies, and so on,
look at World War II.
Yeah, I mean, we go now with World War One. They did it in India as well, which is one of the reasons a lot of people don't know this. But like with the so-called Spanish flu, the Spanish flu decimated India so badly, more so because of the horrible conditions of British colonialism, and they were rising up against the British for their independence and stuff. And anyways, my reason for pointing out India in this particular regard is they would limit their gatherings. There were very small numbers allowed to be together. They were damn sure not allowed to have weapons. So when you see an event like this, oh, now there's weapons, and it's analogous to the same old story we told. These ragtag fighters are somehow now, you know, rising up, and there's this huge administrative power
and coordinated attack,
and a very coordinated
the latest
attack.
technology, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that something like this was absolutely impossible, but my specific point is that it was essentially a minority that did this. And minorities can do horrible, evil things, which is why I'm an advocate for teaching everybody, because most people are decent human beings. I want to teach everybody physical self-defense, mental self-defense, because when you even up the playing field, it makes it a lot more difficult for the psychopaths to control us. And so my point in pointing that out specifically is that you had these Arabs doing these horrible things, but still most of the Arab population were hiding and sheltering the Jewish population, because we have an inborn humanity, and that is something that should unite us and bring us together.
I would love to know the inspiration for that massacre. I would love to know what
there's always more to it. It's part of a wider event, but that's one of the things I haven't meticulously looked into. But it gives us, I suppose, for sure, man. But it gives us something that we can dig a bit more into collectively as an audience.
I'm a big believer. I don't. When these things happen, and I've learned this, you know, it's very rarely because a bunch of people have got together and decided to do some seriously heinous, murderous shit. I mean, I'm not saying that there are not instances in history.
The likelihood is so
that would happen, but usually there's a catalyst. You know,
always, man.
And that's a manipulative deception that happens that makes people bloodthirsty and maniacal. You know, in a way that they would never be, because as you say, and I agree wholeheartedly, this is not our nature. This is not our events like 9/11. You know, this is against everything in our true nature, the nature we're born with, right? And that's why they need the trauma, because they know that it'll cause this berserker kind of thinking that inspires a blood rage, and that's why they use it. They've learned that.
Oh, yeah, 100%, man.
Go on, brother. Sorry.
Yeah, 100%. Well, just quickly to comment on that, for people who want to get a bit of a deeper understanding with this, like earlier I cited Professor Paul Bloom of Yale University, right? The studies he did, one of the most interesting things that I found in that study, and something like this should be taught in every single school. Obviously, we know why it's not, because they instead prefer to proliferate the studies that purport to portray the evils of human nature, right? Like the Stanford prison experiments or the Milgram experiment, where they're already adults, they've already been conditioned. They cannot possibly represent authentic human nature, but then they're going to use that as an example. Right. And these are always sponsored by government, sponsored by military. But in this study, what he found, aside from us having a moral compass, is he would do these very interesting experiments where he would have these small kids, like I said, as young as 3 months old, and they would have these puppets. And the one puppet would play with the other puppet, and then the one of those puppets would be a bully. It would do underhanded things, engage in very overtly and obviously bad behavior. And then he would present the puppets to these small babies. And almost always, these small babies, like I don't know, 90-something% of the time, I don't know specifically, people have to look it up, but they would overwhelmingly choose to play with the good toy, the good puppet. But more than that, what's really interesting is some of these babies would try to discipline the bad puppet. They would hit the puppet.
Wow.
And that's because we have, and he terms it righteous anger, which is, it's very appropriate. We all have this, right? And we can see this when within our historical mythologies, in our fables, in our fairy tales, in our modern day movies. What's the common theme? I like to explain or tell people that if you want to find an accurate measure for human nature that transcends the limitations of what we see through the news and the media and politics, look at what the most popular Hollywood films are worldwide, because they're overwhelmingly the same. Where you'll see the Marvel movies or whatever it may be, it'll be in China, it'll be in Russia, it'll be in the US, it'll be everywhere. And what's the underlying theme? What can you learn from that? What can you extract from that? That people want to see the good triumph over the evil.
That's right.
And we want to punish the evil. And that's just who we are. That's our nature. We are warrior-like species.
Yeah.
So, I just thought, let me go ahead and take an opportunity to compliment what you're saying, because it's not natural to engage in violence unless somehow, some way, somebody is intensely manipulating us, likely arming us as well on some level.
And that's why most crimes are committed. They're crimes of passion.
Passion,
100%. Most murders are committed when someone has lost their shit, and righteous anger is what they are, is filling them with.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's unfortunate, because then when we get into the more methodical, premeditated stuff, then you start to cross into people who are psycho and sociopathic.
Yeah, and unfortunately, at the highest level, they're just very calculated. But it seems that what they do is they engage in a bit of both, where they are doing this in a very calculated manner, but they roll the dice a bit and they say, okay, we're going to use these people with these intense, passionate, irrational passions, and we'll embed some of our people in there to try to steer them. In this case, they had Lawrence of Arabia, who came to feel guilty and so on and so forth. At least that's what his diaries claim. And then there's also always going to be embedded agents that can kind of control how things are going. And then if things don't go well, they'll have a guard dog, a pit bull, get involved, right? Like the other guy, Ibn Saud, he wiped out the Sharif Hussein when he didn't want to play ball. And this is kind of how it always works. The economic hitman, I'm sure you remember him from the Zeitgeist. I can't remember his name now, but he had such a powerful testimony, and he was a former economic hitman. He kind of described this, how things work. So they've got a very skilled blueprint, like ABCD. But just moving forward now, we'll go back to me to share the screen here, and we're going to get into how Israel, as we recognize it today, was created. So 1936, 1939, there was the Arab Revolt in Palestine, and this was specifically against British rule. Okay, again, the primary problem that both populations had, even though I shared that one element, which I kind of wish I didn't, man. I need to dig into that a bit more. It's a bit reckless to do that. But at this time, the primary issue was with the British authorities. So the Arab Revolt in Palestine, 1936 through 1939, this was against the British administration.
Yeah.
The subsequent Jewish insurgency. So after this Arab Revolt in Palestine, the British agreed again, okay, we're going to recognize Arab independence. We're going to restrict the very large numbers of immigrants coming, the Jewish immigrants that are coming in, because it was starting to get a bit overwhelming at this point, right?
Yeah.
And then subsequent to the British administration promising the Arabs these things, there was what's known as the Jewish insurgency in Mandatory Palestine.
Wow, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, that is what we're going to get into now, brother.
Mandatory Palestine. Yeah.
Oh, no, they called it Mandatory Palestine because that was the British administration.
Okay.
Yeah, so they called it Mandatory Palestine. But what took place with this Jewish insurgency, and I shit you not, people can look into the bombing of the King David Hotel, which killed dozens and dozens of innocent people. Okay, I think including kids, if I recall, but lots of innocent people were killed. Actual religious zealot terrorists, Zionist terrorists, engaged in a massive campaign. It was a predecessor organization to the IDF. They engaged in a massive campaign against the British occupying forces. And eventually, through this just insane campaign, okay, that is where the modern state of Israel was born. So it was literally created through terrorism. Now, I'm not one to very lightly use that phrase, but when you are killing innocent civilians and so on and so forth, that's terrorism, right? My thing is, you don't target innocent and vulnerable people. Like, I understand we all have our causes and stuff, but I can't go there, man. So this is where the birth of Israel. So the Nakba it's recognized on one side, and then on the other side, it's Israeli independence. Can be traced to this 1948 Palestinian expulsion and flight, which, I mean, that's a very innocuous way of putting it, but 750 million people, 750,000 people were essentially kicked off of their land by force and through terrorism. So here's just a very basic graphic for people to see. Let me see if I can make it a bit smaller so it shows the source. Okay, there's a source there. So this is massive, guys, and it's through this event, through this seminal event, which was not beneficent, it was not benevolent, it wasn't done through, polite debate and considering the equal interests of human beings, right? Because that's how it has to work, guys. Like, this is
the only way it can work,
It's the only way it can work. Exactly, and so that took place, and the UN ended up favoring the establishment of Israel in a massive way, which is some really interesting stuff there. I wish I had included the slide, man. There's some duplicitous politics behind all of that between let me not even say it, because it would target people so bad. I'll tell you off air, man, because it's very fragmented. I don't want to tell people unless I have like the evidence before me. It's something I became aware of quite recently, which is, it's mind blowing, right? And it's coming from a relatively credentialed source. But essentially, this was also in the wake of World War II and the Holocaust event. So the favoring of the Israel state was a very difficult one to oppose politically. Right? Public relations,
because you had 6 million people.
Oh yeah.
As a who were being leveraged. Their deaths were being leveraged
big time to this very day by people that don't give a shit about them, by people that even financed the whole entire
and
the entire
should make you stop and question.
Oh yeah.
The fact that the same people who were funding the Germans and the army and the Nazis to do what they did to the Jewish people were now pushing for those people to have their own. I mean, that is so suspicious and duplicitous,
to say the least. Yeah,
to put it mildly, and it should make anyone who's listening to this, who is not already completely, hating on everything we're saying.
Well, they wouldn't be still
to question. I guess they wouldn't have made it this far. They would have turned it off long ago. But look, I want to keep going because we still got a lot of stuff to cover, and then we'll go back after that. So let's keep going. I'll remember my question for later.
Okay, cool. You can write it down. I mean, you can also ask it now, brother. I mean, it's cool with me.
We're on a roll. Let's keep going.
Okay, let's rock and roll. Yeah. Okay, so my whole point in sharing that specifically is that this is where the modern state of Israel has its upbringing, where it was created. So we're not seeing specifically any kind of, again, coming back to the human perspective of doing things. We're not seeing the human elements in the establishment of Israel. Yes, there is certainly the view, and one could make the strong argument and case that it's obviously very human in light of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So on the surface, man, it makes all the sense in the world. But with all of the fine print, so to speak, the things that have been concealed from us, the evidence that we've never been privy to, the fact that, like you were pointing out, you have these powerful families, organizations, and so on and so forth, that were behind the support and sponsorship of Hitler and the Nazi regime. On one level, they are supporting this, and then after these atrocities are committed, then they want to say, oh, well, because of these atrocities, we need to create a homeland in which we will have control. And in more modern history, if you look at, let's say, an organization like Genie Energy, which is in the region, it's actually more so Syria, but it operates just in that specific region in its totality. we have the same names. You have people from the CIA. I mean, the board has changed, but you have people from the CIA, from a Rothschild family member. You had the infamous Dick Cheney. And all these people, on any level, do they have allegiance to anything other than the ideology of elitism, to the ideology of exploitation? So that's where we have to be very suspicious of everything that's going on. The establishment of this was not done through a humane transaction.
No.
It would be totally different if, let's say, the Holocaust survivors themselves, they came forward and through exclusive public appeal, they put forward their case and then collectively...
And everyone said, okay, let's...
Instead, it was done through a highly duplicitous manner and done through acts of literal terrorism, and also the most duplicitous and deceptive and, for lack of a better word, just straight up evil people controlling Israel. And that's what people don't get. Like, man, the people that are in control of that region, much as the world in its totality, are not good people, guys.
No.
And they do not have the best interests of humanity
nor do they have the best interests of the Jewish people in mind. The people who live in Israel are victims as much as anyone,
100%.
And the worst part about it is many of them don't realize, they live in this place. They're told that it's being protected by constant attack. They have so much.
Well, they're living in a state of fear. Yeah,
absolutely.
Which is a controlling mechanism.
Security state. It's probably the most. I mean, China can go so far with its population, but Israel. I mean, talk about a national security state. It doesn't get any more state of the art. Everyone has to do their time in the military. It's highly surveilled.
It's a big part of the culture. Yeah, it's a big part of the culture, inculcating the sense of duty strongly attached to not just the religion, but also the historical account of the Holocaust. Like there's a lot there. There's a lot of emotional trauma that's been embedded within people's righteous anger, and it's just taking advantage of people, because at the highest level, they are clearly not. If you look, and I suppose let's get into that, where if you look at their dealings, and I suppose before we do anything, just on the topic of the Holocaust, this meme that I made, just so people can also understand, it's so important to get the Jewish perspective on this. See, we have multiple Jewish historians, ex-Israeli military personnel, Holocaust survivors, and other prominent figures that have spoken out against Zionism in the state of Israel. That's such an important thing to point out to people.
Yes.
And these are credentialed historians. These are significant figures. And again, Holocaust survivors. And when you see stuff like that, at least I know for myself, that naturally opens up your mind a bit more, because they like to portray the specious image that this is everybody. That's all the Jews are totally behind us. And historically, from the very beginning, from the very beginning of this establishment, that's not the case. That has not ever been the case. So they are deceiving us in that particular regard. Okay, so let's get into now the methodology about the modern state of Israel and why we should question this government and how it engages in things that we know from an objective standpoint. So to engage in just like a practice of critical thinking, for those who have difficulty wrapping their heads around it, who are still with us, what I would suggest is try to frame it as being a totally different government. You don't have to say the government of Israel, say the government of Saudi Arabia, government of Iraq.
Objectively.
And then ask yourself if the behaviors that they are engaging in are problematic, just objectively speaking, not based on religion, not based on anything else, but just objectively speaking. Okay, so the first thing is, let's get into the unprecedented censorship. So we see over here, we all know now, obviously, about social media censorship, right? It's quite ubiquitous. But what do we see here? This is from February 2016. The military censor seeks control over blogs and Facebook posts. Bloggers are now required to submit all security-related posts for advanced review.
Word. They love to use that word, security.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, anybody who has half a brain, I mean, not to be too condescending, but immediately this is political kind of language. They do this specifically because it's very ambiguous, and then they can weaponize it against anybody for anything related to their operations. And trust me, their operations can be highly deceptive and duplicitous, which I'm going to get into in just a moment. So my point being, and this is from the Times of Israel in terms of a credentialed source, my point being in all of this, guys, is that, okay, we know, objectively speaking, we don't like to be censored, right? We don't like to have information censored. They were doing this back in 2016, and actually was prior to that, but they are censoring just regular blogs and Facebook posts.
The internet, like China.
That's just
basically.
Exactly. Objectively speaking, that's wrong. The way that we establish the truth is not through censorship, guys. It is never, ever through censorship. And then, of course, we have this modern day conflict. And this was October 14th. It's, of course, skyrocketed since then.
Right.
But the attacking of hospitals and so on and so forth, although this is not specifically highlighting that, that's something that the government has also been engaged in terms of human rights abuses, guys. If you just look up the human rights abuses, and of course, yes, the UN is a highly questionable organization. Let me just speak on that for a moment, because people like to use this as like some kind of a straw man argument. Yes, the UN is in terms of, I'm somebody that has literally written the book on the establishment of UN for the purpose of population control and elitism. Like, I literally wrote that book, guys.
Right.
I understand that. However, all organizations, whether it's the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the US government, any organization you can virtually think of, even intelligence agencies, most of the people at the lower ranks are decent people that think they are doing good things. It's at the highest levels that they know what is going on, and they use this for sinister intentions and purposes. So when you see these reports and you actually don't blindly and impulsively dismiss them. Yes, never. I've got a saying, you never blindly believe anybody, but you never blindly dismiss them either. Okay, the only way we can establish the truth is we have got to investigate. That is how the power of the truth is obtained, guys. There is no other way to do it. There has to be some form of investigation. Whereas the way that deception is established historically is through the appearance of authority that we blindly believe. Oh, it's a professional. Oh, it's an expert. And then also when they put these landmines in our heads. For example, the last podcast I did with Joel and Yerasimos, where
buddies,
they're fantastic human beings. Love those dudes, man. Where they commented on how it's so skilled in the way that they make sure that only the liberal media is reporting on these things taking place. And they did the same thing with the whole lockdown bullshit. They made sure that it was just conservative media reporting on it.
Right.
And what this does is it promotes tribalism. It prevents us from thinking objectively, and instead we regress into the very lazy thinking patterns of, this is tribalism. It's them. It's that
two people yelling at each other,
100%.
Because they're literally living on different planets and being fed completely different ideas about what's happening. And that's when you see the total breakdown in communication. That is the tribalism that they seek, and that's exactly what's happening right now. Total breakdown. People 100%. Yelling at each other. No one listening.
It's sad, man. It's a very sad state of affairs. But I am optimistic always about that eventually we'll wear off. But my point is very simple, that this government it's not a benevolent government. Okay. Those crimes, if you look at the UN's list of human rights violations, historically, things are coming up again. Historically, they have been embedded over and over and over again in horrible crimes against humanity. Literally, they have targeted journalists, for example. Please tell me I've got that slide somewhere. People can go look it up. They've targeted journalists. They've actually killed journalists. All right. And the evidence emerged. And the evidence emerged that they were deliberately targeting them. This is why we need to remove religion out of the equation, because what happens is when people view this from a religious perspective, you feel like you have to defend your tribe. I have to defend my religion. Oh, you're not understanding. Guys, from a human perspective, there are certain things that are they're just red lines. You never cross that red line. And targeting a journalist, even if that journalist is saying things that you don't like and they're reporting on stories that you don't want to be reported, is wrong. You don't kill an innocent human being. You don't bomb a hospital.
It's the same thing as terrorism,
Yeah, 100%, man, 100%. And we can also get into the whole human shield thing, because, and also essentially that I've looked into, there you go, up again. I've gone through about 100 to 200 hours, okay, of testimony of actual IDF forces, military folks that have been there, and that's when you really start to get a good idea. But just going back to the censorship, we have this guy, John Lyons. It might be John Lyons, and essentially this guy, he's an award-winning journalist. He's deeply revered. You can go look him up, and he has gone a record that basically stating that when it comes to reporting on Israel, the state of Israel, it's unprecedented censorship. And reporters are constantly engaged in self-censorship because they are scared. They don't want to be, and I quote, savagely targeted. So, see over here, this is coming from Mondo Weiss. You can look up this particular news source, not a controversial source to cite. And when asked about, people being scared about being censored, he basically says, everybody. And then this is him in conversation with allegedly somebody he calls one of the toughest bureau chiefs around. So this is somebody in charge of a news agency. And then he explains that as part of the book I interviewed, because he was writing a book called Balcony Over Jerusalem, a Middle East Memoir. As part of the book, I interviewed the New York Times, The Economist, Reuters, AFP, and I found a common trait. Reuters even has their own special words that we are allowed to use that won't upset the Israelis. And I went there with the view that I'd been in Washington and New York, that I would report it as I saw it. But every time I would write about settlements, something that's factual, you get targeted as a journalist. Wow. Now, again, guys, that's such a big deal, okay? That is such a big deal because what we essentially have is tyrannical. Yeah, no, that is unbelievably authoritarian. Yeah. So again, this is why I try to remove the religious interpretation from this. That's not okay. This is a credentialed journalist, highly revered, not a controversial figure, and yet the moment he gets engaged in it, or if you look deep into what he's saying, every time somebody tries to dig into objective evidence of what's going on there, then they get labeled anti-Semitic, then they get attacked, and they get smeared in the media. This is wrong, guys. These are underhanded tactics. Okay, they are truly underhanded tactics, but it gets worse. Now, Chris Hedges, he's obviously another very popular authority. And I'd like to make it just very clear, guys, just because I'm citing these individuals does not mean I entirely agree with them on all of their positions and their standpoints. Right. But when when somebody has a good insight, I give credit where credit is due. So yeah, we have Chris Hedges, another credentialed individual that could be cited in this particular regard. Like I said, I don't agree with everything he has to say. But I mean, that's life, right? You don't agree with everything on otherwise you're not going to learn anything. But he wrote this in Truth Dig. And his level of honesty in journalism is still something that I think is worthy of noting. And this is from August of 2014. And he was in the Gaza refugee camp of Khan Yunis, okay? And he explains that I saw small boys baited and killed by Israeli soldiers in the Gaza refugee camp of Khan Yunis. The soldiers swore at the boys in Arabic over the loudspeakers of their armored jeep. The boy is about 10 years old, then threw stones at an Israeli vehicle, and the soldiers opened fire, killing some, wounding others. Now, I've looked at testimony. This has happened on numerous occasions. Okay,
they got shoot to kill orders. I saw testimony too. They got shoot to kill orders. It doesn't matter.
The thing is, from all of the testimony I've looked at, they don't have anybody to kind of dictate what they should and shouldn't do. So let me just discuss that quickly. Guys, so there's an excellent website called Breaking the Silence. You don't hear much about this, which is bizarre to me. Well, it's not bizarre to me, but Breaking the Silence, which has just tons and tons of ex-Israeli military officials, people that worked in special forces, people that, tons, man. I've been, a long time ago, I started working on this, but it proved to be so overwhelming. I've got like pages and pages of video footage that I've edited. Hey, puppy. I've got tons and tons of video footage that I've been going through and editing just to show, and it came out to be like almost 50 different testimonies, which is a large number, that show a clear, consistent theme of terrorizing the local population, randomly shooting up homes, ransacking homes. So they'll go into like old couple's home and they'll just tear it upside down, and just like terrorizing the population, also using actual civilians as human shields. That's legitimately, and of course, no surprise, the gaslighting propaganda is the total inversion of that. Right. But when you listen to the military testimony over and over and over, and you see these common themes and these common threads, you know it's the real deal. And they feel intense guilt. They have no motive for doing this because they get ostracized and alienated by their society. They get targeted. And of course, who's heard of this organization Breaking the Silence? Very few people. Very few people. No. And it's alarming to me because their testimony is shocking, man. And they talk about kids getting like just straight up shot and killed, and nothing happens. There's no report about it. They can cover up the reports. They also explain how they can detain kids of any age, and they can do it for an indefinite amount of time. They explain how whatever, a 19-year-old or something, he can go serve over there, a kid essentially. Even a 21-year-old, you're still a kid in many ways. Yeah. You're going over there and you have complete authority over how you treat the population there. There's other cases where
complete authority. That's right.
Yeah, 100% authority. There's cases where at the blockades and stuff, right? So the places that the checkpoints where somebody needed urgent medical attention and then they ended up dying because they couldn't get the medical attention because they couldn't get through the blockade. Like there's horrible. That's...
What about mowing the lawn? You hear people talking about. I heard Gabor, I think is how you say his name, talking about mowing the lawn and how. Have you heard of that phrase that the Israelis, I guess, occasionally do to the Palestinians? They call it mowing the lawn.
Look, what I will tell you from the military testimony is that there are certain phrases that emerge. I'm not familiar with that one, but one such as demonstrating presence. Demonstrating presence is basically you just like you create terrorism. You scare the population. Yeah. You keep them living in fear. Right, and there's intense curfews in Palestine, so you have to be at home at a certain time. The one guy talks about how they would have them on curfew for like 3 days straight. You can't leave your home. Right.
And if you do, you can be you
can be considered an enemy combatant. It's wild, man. The stuff that goes on there is wild. And then what people need to recognize is while they are occupying these forces or occupying this land, at the same time, these kids that have been instructed and brainwashed, and that's one of the reasons, you have to go serve in the military at this age and so on and so forth. These kids that go there, they've already been brainwashed that these people want to kill you. They're terrorists. They're evil. Right. They hate you. They hate you because you're Jewish.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. That's not going to, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I want to get through with that, but I also told myself, man, before I do that, because that's going to, who knows how long it's going to take me. You know how I am. I like to do things properly. But then I said, man, in terms of a moral obligation, I just need to talk on what I know now. So going back to this testimony with Chris Hedges. Oh, and sorry, I didn't even share the thing yet. Whoa there, Gavin. Getting a little bit ahead of yourself. Okay.
No problem.
Yeah, so he explains that, this is it's a very common thing. He explained that I was present more than once as Israeli troops drew out and shot Palestinian children in this way. And this is because, unfortunately, when you can get led to believe that you're actually fighting something that's truly evil, right? Yeah. Just in the same way that people can believe, like, these certain scriptures in the Bible about genocide is okay.
Listen, there's a perfect example in World War II, okay? The Germans were convinced the Jews were evil. And so that allowed them to act without conscience, right? How else do you do what you do?
100%.
They were widely convinced, and so you have to detach
and these episodes of this, and there's a lot of episodes of this historically, man. Psychologically, it's disturbing, but it's also very instructive. That if you look at what also happened in Rwanda, the people that were oppressed eventually were the ones that carried out the genocide. So there's a lot of psychological repression that can go in there. The same thing happened in Germany, because what took place in World War I and then the occupation of Germany, the people who, they were brutalized and just systemically oppressed in horrible ways. They weren't given access to any really good leaders, but then comes this very charismatic fellow by the name of Hitler, who they finance him, the powers that be, the Anglo-Saxon powers, also the Jewish ruling class. Just a ruling establishment period. We don't even need to recognize them by these labels that they don't care about in any way, shape, or form. They finance this guy into power. They allow him to elicit all the repressed emotions inside the people.
They build his military, they build the economy, then they snatch it away, you know?
Yeah, just like that. And they're trying to do similar things in different parts of the world. You know, even the rise of a character like, let's say, you got a Donald Trump, you got a Andrew Tate, you got all of these figures who, these cats in their own right, they represent a danger. And I'm not just saying this because I suppose I shouldn't have chosen those two figures because the conservative population aligns with them so much. But there's so many, man. You can think of just so many popular individuals that are proliferated by the system. And they do this strategically. They withhold those who are genuinely trying to empower you with a strong sense of identity, a strong sense of truth, a strong sense of human principles that makes you essentially unfuckwithable, which makes you untouchable in relation to their manipulative chess game. They censor those people, but they'll amplify the more radicalized voices that help to serve the tribal game, that help to serve the game of divide and conquer. So that's essentially exactly what took place in that particular regard. And there's a lot of interesting psychology there. But just moving forward, and sorry, man, that this is such a lengthy thing, but it's a complex deception.
It's a lot to unpack, and if you want the full history, you know, I'm also interested in what the Israelis have been doing to the Palestinian people since 1948, and since they put them in that god-awful open-air prison, which is now basically almost...
look, that's where the military testimony is so paramount. You know, I always try to speak on this particular conflict through credentialed Jewish figures. So if it's going to be in relation to what's going on in Palestine or Gaza or the West Bank, it's going to be about the soldiers who were actually there, because I haven't been there. Yeah. Like, what can I tell you about that? And then are we going to rely on the media? The so trustworthy media.
Or if it's someone on the Palestinian side, they're going to say it's biased, and they're of course. So in terms of sources, the best you're going to get, in my opinion, is always going to be the Israeli soldiers, which is what I did with the U.S. military soldiers in the back in the day. They're going to give you a perspective because it's not in their best interest to do so. So what is the motive for them to lie? You know, they're risking everything essentially. It's the same with the architects. They can't all be self-hating Jews, right? I mean.
And that's what they get called, man. But the moral conscience within human beings, irrespective of skin color and religion, is so powerful that it puts us in a position where we can, in the face of all opposition, still say, no, look, this isn't right.
Yeah, this is what's happening. Look.
Yeah. So we have, once again, just Chris Hedges. I mean, he details Israel's, and this is I suppose a good summation, right, of everything there. That I would agree with his statement, that Israel's indiscriminate use of modern. And I mean, I hate to also frame these things as Israel's. Like, Israel is an intangible construct. There are people behind these decisions, and that's where the responsibility.
And it's not the Israeli people necessarily, and that's why
not at all.
We run into such problems because
it's tribal, man.
It's totally tribal.
Yeah,
but right tribal. There it is. Look at that. Israel's indiscriminate use of modern industrial weapons to kill thousands of innocents, wound thousands more, and make tens of thousands of families homeless is not war. It's state-sponsored terror. I mean, that's a statement from 2021. What's happening right now? And when you start to understand the history, it's much harder to be confused about what may or may not be happening right now.
Oh yeah,
and it doesn't excuse the actions of Hamas.
Well, I mean, look, like he says right there, I agree with exactly what he's saying. And while I oppose the indiscriminate firing of rockets by Palestinians, he's talking about obviously Hamas into Israel.
Right.
As I oppose suicide bombings, seeing them also as war crimes, I am acutely aware of a huge disparity between the industrial violence carried out by the Israeli government against innocent Palestinians and the minimal acts of violence capable of being waged by groups such as Hamas. Now, I mean, look, with that said, because I'm sure anybody that wants to argue against that will say, well, look what happened. That's not a minimal act of violence. I wholeheartedly agree with that. But a major event like that, guys, one that is so incendiary and evocative and happening in the face of all odds in terms of the intelligence apparatus.
The Iron Dome.
Brother.
That's a a couple $1 billion attack, okay? Where did Hamas get a couple $1 billion? And who do you think is keeping track of every freaking cent that Hamas gets in and out? I mean,
exactly.
This is fantasy to imagine that the United States and Israel were the victim of a surprise attack by Hamas, not a terrorist group you've never heard of that's been operating off the grid, off the map. And even then, somehow they would have noticed that amount of money moving and those kinds of weapons moving.
100%.
This is like beyond fantasy. It's ludicrous, you know.
And I suppose somewhere where we can quickly go just to help people once again understand the level of Machiavellian politics and that the Israeli government itself, how they operate and the mindset of the leadership is there was Operation Susanna, okay, sometimes known as the Leviathan affair. And let me see, I think I do have a screenshot of this. And essentially this was a false flag, guys. It was a major operation that was to take place in Egypt. And this operation, here we go, beautiful. Disturbing legacy of Operation Susanna and the Leviathan affair. All right. So what took place with this is that, let me quickly, all right, get some FaceTime there. Sorry, people. Don't mean to be so heavy with the slideshows. So what took place with the Egyptian government is that the Israeli establishment, the Zionist establishment, saw that certain Western political factions or Western governments, the US and the UK namely, were working with the Egyptian government. So they had sleeper cells, which is essentially where you have a team of operatives in the country that will do whatever it is that you would like to do,
right?
Whatever intelligence operation, whatever clandestine operation on your command. And so they had the sleeper cell. I can't remember how many figures it was, but it was like maybe less than a dozen. And their job was to literally, and they did do this, carry out bombings on strategic places. So the post office, the movie theaters, and engage in acts of terrorism. And the whole purpose behind this was to blame the Egyptians and blame, I think it was the communist Egyptians or the anarchists. It may have been blaming the anarchists. It was just to blame the left wing. You know, they all get associated together anyways, even though they're totally different things, anarchy and communism, but let's just blame them all together the same thing.
Right. People won't know.
Yeah, exactly. And this was back during like the Cold War era, so it was a hot topic. This is, I think, in the 50s. And so they did this. And they ended up getting caught because one of the bombs went off prematurely. So for decades, the Israeli government concealed this intelligence. They didn't tell people. There was circumstantial evidence. There was stuff that clearly indicated, but of course you couldn't get like the official acknowledgement.
They had plausible deniability. They're so good at
plausible deniability. However, now eventually they did concede that yes, they were involved in this specific operation, and they went so far after several decades of this lying to go ahead and honor, oh, there you go, 9, it was 9 of them. They honored, after 50 years, the 3 surviving members were given certificates of appreciation. All right, certificates of appreciation, guys.
They should give let's show certificates out to the survivors of the USS Liberty.
I mean, but that right there is illustrative and instructive of what this government is about. Because, you know, once again, from an introductory perspective, a human perspective, carrying out terrorist attacks. Now, they claim that, you know, no innocent civilians were harmed. But, of course, if you're bombing post offices, if you are planning on bombing movie theaters, the room for something going wrong in that particular event is extremely high. And it's just the fact that you are trying to lay blame of a terrorist attack on another government for the purpose of public relations. It's extremely deceptive, guys. And not only did they do this, but 50 years later, after keeping it secret and denying it, then when it finally emerges, they give certificates of appreciation. Like, where's the remorse? Right? So you
no
don't
apologies. No apology. Nothing for the families.
Exactly. Just, like that is just, that's just,
wow.
It's, to me, that's insane, man. So again, this is why I try to explain to people, don't view this with the trappings of tribalism and religious interpretation. And just very quickly, where earlier, because I like to give sources, where earlier I explained to people that the Israel, the last time I checked, they were the 4th viewed as the fourth strongest military in the empire. I mean, well, I suppose that's accurate too. We are in some kind of dystopian empire. This is from the Times of Israel, where they essentially note from the U.S. News and World Report that Israel ranks among 10 most powerful countries in annual list and the fourth strongest military. And this is behind only the U.S., China, and Russia. And just to give people a visual, there we have Russia, there we have China, there we have the U.S. And what's that there? That's small.
Wait. Oh, there they are. Look at that.
I mean, so guys,
and it's funny because, the UK and all, the entirety of the UK, I mean, they've put their eggs in Israel's basket, so to speak. They know that they have the United States and Israel. The United States is, obviously number one, and then Israel is like the sidekick almost.
The thing that I try to explain to people, man, is we are viewing the world through this very antiquated lens of interpretation, where they, and they constantly portray this in history books and through the media and television. And Russia and China are ganging up against America. First of all, these are countries. There are collectively billions of people in these countries. They don't give a shit about these conflicts.
Right.
And if you look very closely at the highest levels of business, the bankers, and even the officials in positions of government, they're interconnected with all of these corporations that are stationed in Russia. They're stationed in China. And the different families have interest over there. Rockefeller families have major interest in China.
Kidding me?
Yeah.
And the Rockefellers were responsible for making sure that Russia had the information it needed to build its own nuclear program. Do you understand? I think it was Victor
the Council
Rothschild.
On Foreign Relations. I mean, all of it.
There can't be a Cold War if only one side has nukes. So what the Rothschilds made sure that the Russians had plans to build their own arsenal, and they did. This is how nefarious.
It's unbelievably evil. To them, that's why I say it's like a chess game where sure there's going to be pawns that are going to die, but in the end, the two kings they're not going to die. On some level or another, they're going to cooperate, or the two chess players, the one might beat the other one, and I'll get you next time. But nonetheless, nothing's going to happen to them. And so, we have these powers that are pumping billions and billions and billions of dollars and extremely sophisticated levels of technology into Israel. And I'd like people to ask themselves, who are still viewing this through the very misguided religious interpretation, do you think the U.S. government right now is aligned with the tenets of Christianity or Judaism or religion? No, they all about the woke agenda and all that bullshit.
They just excused the civilians. They said, "Listen, Israel is at war." I'm like, really? Who the fuck are they at war with? I don't see anyone shooting. I don't see any airstrikes happening to Israel. I mean, there was obviously the initial quote attack that we were all made aware of, but like we know that was allowed to happen because that little piece of technology, the Iron Dome, the most sophisticated thing of its kind, just happened to turn off for like 6 hours. Whatever you want to say was allowed to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, at the same time, like, what we have taking place as well when we look at the story between. So first of all, we know this is just geopolitically, this is a very important piece of land. And so right. I suppose just getting a little bit back to earlier when I was saying we get told like, oh, Russia and China and America, like these are people or something. The true power structure is an intangible one. And it's made up of different corporations, media outlets, elements within governments, intelligence agencies, mafia, organized crime, big pharmaceutical companies,
huge corporations,
all kinds of things, and it's global, and it's not joined together through like borders that we can outline on a map. Like these people are working interconnectedly, internationally, and so Israel as a state, beyond the religious interpretation, is clearly a piece of that puzzle. That's right. It's one big empire, right? And ultimately, the primary objective is not just to methodically oppress and even wipe out these Palestinian people, which personify like a form of rebellion, and there's nothing more that the ruling class hate and despises historically than people that personify rebellion and are, refuse to bow down. Like, you got kids throwing stones at tanks. It's the equivalent of way back in the day with Diocletian. He's trying to murder these early Christians, and they're like, nope, we're not going to bend the knee. It's the equivalent of that. And also on the other side, you had scientists when the Christian establishment came to power, where they wouldn't bend the knee, and so they get persecuted too. So to me, that's what that truly essentially represents. But just in relation to also, like, speaking about Hamas, a lot of people have heard about this rumor that the Israeli government was responsible in some way or another, for creating Hamas. And there's truth to that. There is absolutely truth to that. There was a organization back in the day called the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and this was a secular, non-religious movement. They were a nationalist movement, and so they were gaining popularity. The Palestinian people favored them. And so what did the Israeli government do? They said, well, geez, we see all the support.
That's not going to work. You won't be able to fight with them.
Yeah, that's not good for business. They're not making about religion. I mean, we can't weaponize people so easily against what they're asking for, which is... Exactly. And I'm not saying that they were angels in any way, shape, or form, because they weren't. But I mean, at the same time, this was a secular movement, which is to say non-religious. That's a big deal. So what did they do? Right. They go ahead and they start encouraging and on some levels working
Funding,
exactly, working with Hamas, the group we recognize as Hamas today. And this is not me saying this, okay? This is officials, high-ranking officials within the Israeli government. And people can actually go look up. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple years back that illustrated this. You have to go to archive.org, unfortunately, to look it up because it's behind a paywall. And then there's also a more modern one that was printed in the Intercept, the Intercept, which they've got some decent reports and stuff that people can go check out, where it explains that, yes, this took place. And to me, like several years ago, I published a video where it said, how the Israeli government helped create Hamas. And this was on Facebook, where people have the laughing emoji. They have access to that undermining laughing. It was just overwhelming because...
That's fun.
It's such a knee-jerk reaction and dismissive that people don't realize you have a landmine that has been established in your way of thinking. And so immediately when you hear that, you think that's the craziest, most ridiculous thing. And yet it's aligned with objective reality and therefore the truth.
Yep. That's the world we live in right now. People they just can't believe it,
Yeah, it's just, I mean, you can't bring yourself to believe it, but it's a tricky thing. And we've obviously had quite some time to methodically unpack all of the horse manure that has been piled into our minds. And so I don't expect anybody to just do it all at once. Right. But it's imperative that we try our very best to be humble and recognize that my perception is limited. And what I know today compared to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is like a quantum leap. And I also, it sounds silly, but I try to remind people, remember, at one time, we all believed in Santa Claus. We all believed in the Easter Bunny.
And the Tooth Fairy.
Yeah, and the Tooth Fairy. And if somebody...
The Tooth Fairy? What is it? I mean, when you're kids, you believe, I mean...
100%. And if another kid said, that's not true, you and your other buddies would be like, doesn't believe in the Tooth Fairy, this fool.
Yeah, or you get mad at them, be like, yeah, it is true,
Right. But that is just a simple example of, we have this narrow perception of reality, and we just have to be a little bit more open-minded, man.
We have to be willing to evolve. We have to be humble enough to say, wait a minute, maybe what I've been taught strays from what is the truth, and maybe some of what I was taught is true, but why don't I take a look at it and pretend like I don't have a, I don't want one side to be right. I just want to know what happened. And you have to kind of look at things because a lot of people don't want to imagine an Israel that is not God's people, because it goes against the Bible, and that's what they've been taught. Right?
And
but you have to, if you want to consider this information, because you won't truly consider it unless you do. Right.
And what you just made me also consider, it actually goes even to a deeper seated level of problem, which is, and I mean, this will prepare me for the next podcast in this particular regarding conversation, but the whole religious conviction and interpretation behind this is also deeply tied to people's sense of identity and their handle on the world. Like, this is what's really going on. So if it gets removed, that's quite psychologically
Shattering.
overwhelming. Yeah,
Shattering.
That's really overwhelming. So that's a nice way to frame that. That it's actually because people are scared to recognize that I don't fully understand what's going on in this world.
And what I thought I knew may be very far from the truth. It's very scary. Let me ask you this, Gavin, because I only got about 7 minutes left. I got to go pick up my son from school.
Children always come first, brother. I could talk to you about
this for hours, but so there are people who think, for whatever reason, whatever history lesson they've got and geographical lesson that they've received, that the Palestine was never Palestine. I get these comments and these questions. They're like, name one time the Palestinians owned Palestine, and I'm just like, I don't understand the question. You know, if you were to go back and look at a map, like the 3rd century, you know, you would see a place called Palestinia, Syria. I think that was what they called it. And yeah, the name has changed, but as far as I understand it, was it ever Israel? Was it, I mean, maybe there was a brief time in biblical times, but in modern time, whose land was it? And why do people think that that Palestine and the Palestinians somehow or other are that they don't belong there? It's almost like they're the ones that came in who don't belong, even though we've just spent 2.5 hours discussing how, in fact, it was the Jewish people after the First World War and after Second World War who came in and who were not part of that land.
All right. So what I'm going to do, and sorry, while you're talking, I'm busy looking for this specific slide, and let's also look up an original map of Israel or Palestine. So essentially the land was called Canaan back in the day.
Canaan.
Okay. I just want to pull up a visual for people to see if they will provide us with one. This is the thing about whenever these very evocative events are taking place, it becomes very difficult.
Yeah, to find. I know exactly what you're saying.
People can look it up. I'm going to entrust people to do a bit of legwork. We've done a lot of legwork here, guys, so you can meet us halfway. Essentially, yes, it was called the land of Canaan, and then it was also later recognized as the land of the Phoenicians. Okay. Interestingly, the ancestors of this specific part of land, and this is where I'm going to share the screen, they are in fact overwhelmingly from the ancestry of Lebanese people. So here we have genetic studies suggest present-day Lebanese descend from biblical Canaanites. Researchers analyzed DNA extracted from 4,000-year-old remains to reveal that more than 90% of Lebanese ancestry is from ancient Canaanite populations.
Wow.
So that was something that I was interested in. And if you look into it, it was legit. These were science studies. So they actually show, okay, this is the specific population, and Palestinians themselves have got Lebanese blood. Not all of them, but those are the people that are actually originally from there, who are now in Lebanon. And there's also Lebanese people here in South Africa. So if people actually want to get to the heart of the truth on that particular question, what the evidence is showing is that it's Lebanese people. And for me, the most conspicuous form of reality available, and I suppose let me not use these silly words, but the thing that is the most tangible to grasp, like the most in your face, that is representative of the truth until something else emerges. So the truth of the situation is the land of Canaan was there a long time ago. In the Bible, it also says, I'll give you the land of Canaan through an act of genocide. And the ancestors of that particular land, genetically speaking, are Lebanese.
There you have it. And I also saw, I'll try and find the study, but this is a very controversial thing. And archaeologists and people who do this kind of work have found out the hard way that you're not allowed to talk about this. You're not allowed to publish studies about it. So but I was
Also very manipulated industry, man.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh my God. Ask Graham Hancock. He'll tell you.
Oh yeah, I love Graham Hancock. I guess that's a good dude. We're lucky to have him, man.
But I was reading something, and I it'll probably be difficult to find, but maybe it was an interview. But the guy was like, listen, he was like, I tried to. I think it was an archaeologist. He was like, I tried to publish a paper about this, and they wouldn't let me publish it. And he said because the paper revealed that the modern day Israelis hail from the mountains of Caucasus, if it predominantly. And I was like, well, yeah, they can't let you publish that, dude. Are you kidding me?
Is this tied into the Ashkenazi story?
It might
from Khazaria. I mean, I don't know. I just remember back in the day, I went down that rabbit hole.
It might be actually. Now that you say that, I have to I have to look it up. I shouldn't have said it either.
No, it's fine. But you know what? The thing is, while we're doing this podcast, me and you are just kind of talking as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
No, it's cool. And as fellow researchers who may be listening to this, we drop a seed, and then they may have more time to look into it, and then they go ahead and who knows, they help to pick up the greater pursuit of truth that we all have a moral responsibility and duty to contribute towards.
And let me point this out real quick while it's on my mind. The fact that we do have studies that show scientifically that the Canaanites are in fact, as far as science and DNA tells us, related directly to the Lebanese population of today. The fact that if you look, I imagine you're going to have a hard time finding where modern day Israeli DNA comes from. That should raise suspicions, because you can probably find out just about where everywhere else on the planet is from. But the people who control these things, and academia in general, they're not going to let you see where those people are from. Now, there's a reason for that. And anyone who's listening, I encourage you to try and find out. And notice that it's like Star Wars. There's something missing from the files, and that's where you need to look,
100%, man. No, 100%. It's also the trouble with the ruling class, like all compulsive liars, is they spew out so much deception that they have to constantly find a way to uphold this deception, and then they find themselves weaving more and more spider webs, and unfortunately we become the casualties in all of that. And so our minds become ensnared and wrapped up in all these deceptive narratives that we don't even know what reality is anymore. We don't know what the truth is. No. And they do it for specifically what you're saying. They want to conceal something, and then it leads to another lie and another lie and another lie, and there's no length that they will not go to conceal their true colors. And that's why they are willing to sacrifice innocent civilians.
Absolutely. And then what happens is the truth is lost, because generation upon generation is built, the lies are built upon, and it literally becomes impossible to find out sometimes what the original fabrication,
the unadulterated
deception
truth
was. Yeah. Because I mean, and then people don't even know why they're lying, and they don't even know the truth, but they know that they have to lie because the truth is too outrageous, and they would be,
all the psychology. All the psychology involved in that. Machiavelli also spoke about that. Just one more thing before you go.
Go for it.
I want to give this is important. This is a documentary people can check out on their own dime. Oh yes, and also that website. Okay, let me share this quickly and then let you go, because kids are everything, man. They are. That's the real work. Above and beyond all else, there is nothing as important as raising our little revolutionary beings and loving them, and just doing our best to be good parents. My apologies, man. Trying to
no worries, brother.
Get this going. Yeah.
Listen, while you get that going, tell everyone where to find you. Where we're gonna have to talk again, because
for sure, man. I'm always down.
We want to talk about. I want to talk about that school. We got. I want to go back and talk about the Bolshevik Revolution. I need an education about that and how.
Yeah, that's a very interesting time, man.
Very, very interesting time. Not many people realize how pivotal that was to what's happening today. And what there's just so much stuff that we need to talk about.
Yes. Oh, man. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, it wasn't coming up there.
No worries.
Okay. First and foremost, to point people to this website about the testimony of these different soldiers go to Breaking the Silence, guys. Let me just look it up specifically so I can give people. There you go, Breaking the Silence. .org.il/testimonies/videos. Okay, that is a treasure trove. You want to find out what's really going on, you can go out and check that out. It is disturbing, but it will help you get aligned with the truth. Here's this old story from 2004 where they literally got caught using a Palestinian boy as a human shield. And then just the last one. This was actually big on my personal journey. This documentary called The Zionist Story. This was a major moment in my own disillusionment. This was in 2009. So just to give some people some background on that before we conclude here. The Zionist Story was made by an actual ex-Israeli soldier, and he goes through the history of what took place there. Go and check it out. The guy is very intelligent. You may be familiar somewhere through the pipeline. You've heard about this account called Dish Propaganda. He's also got a website, Dish Propaganda. He's a very intelligent dude. He made that documentary. He's an ex-military individual, and that helped disillusion me. So it's a good place for people to check out. Awesome. Other than that, you can find me online. Look up my name, Gavin Nascimento, or at Truth Warrior Gavin. I try to get into the fray of things whenever I can. Life is very crazy right now. I have a family, financial obligations, so on and so forth. But you can look me up there. You can also support my work at Patreon, which I'm gradually moving away from because, unfortunately, this is also controlled invariably by the establishment. But yes, if you are looking for me, you can find me at those places.
Awesome, bro. Hey, listen, man, I appreciate your work so much, Gavin. I can't tell you how much. I know how much time you put into it, and it's such an incredible resource. Everyone who's listening, follow this man everywhere you can, because you will stay informed and you will be able to stay much safer in this world we're living in. Brother, we're gonna have to do it again soon. I'm so sorry I got to bounce. Thank you so much for the education, man. It's priceless, and right now it needs it. So the conversation was so important to me, and thank you. I'm grateful, bro. Listen, good luck with everything, and we'll be in touch soon, okay?
We'll be in touch, man. All right, go do your thing.
Okay, bro.
All right, brother.
Thank you, man.
Peace.
Okay, brother.
Cool,
Thank
man.
you.